For years, a woman thought she had the perfect life with her billionaire husband, until every single night he sat at the edge of the bed, silently staring at her face. At first she thought it was love, until his eyes stopped looking warm and started looking confused. Then one night she finally asked him why he kept watching her. But instead of answering, he froze, like he didn't even know who she was. As she digs for the truth, she uncovers a locked room, a hidden collection of portraits, and a woman who looks exactly like her, a woman who was supposed to be dead. Suddenly, the billionaire's strange behavior isn't just creepy. It's connected to a secret so shocking it could tear their marriage apart. If the man she married can't recognize her, then who does he see when he looks at her? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The early morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Matthew Cross's Denver penthouse, casting a warm glow across Madison Ellis's face. As consciousness slowly crept in, she became aware of something, or someone, watching her. Her eyes fluttered open, and there he was. Matthew, her husband of less than 24 hours, sat perfectly still in a plush armchair near the bed, his intense gaze fixed upon her. Madison's heart skipped a beat. "Good morning," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady despite the unexpected sight. "How long have you been sitting there?" "A while," Matthew replied, his voice gentle but somehow distant. He wore an impeccably tailored grey suit, already dressed for the day. His handsome features remained unreadable as he continued to study her face. Madison pulled the silk sheets closer, suddenly feeling exposed despite her modest nightgown. During their whirlwind courtship, Matthew had been nothing but kind and attentive. Yet something about his current behavior sent a chill down her spine. "Would you like to have breakfast?" Matthew asked, finally breaking his strange trance. His smile returned, the warm, genuine one she'd fallen in love with. "The chef makes amazing French toast." "That sounds wonderful," Madison replied, forcing herself to push aside her unease. After all, they were newlyweds. It was natural for things to feel a little awkward at first. After freshening up in the marble bathroom that was bigger than her old apartment's bedroom, Madison emerged in a simple sundress. Matthew waited for her in the spacious living room, now fully transformed into the charming man she knew. "Let me show you around properly," he said, taking her hand. "This is your home now, too." The tour was overwhelming in its grandeur. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of one of Denver's most exclusive buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the city and mountains beyond. The kitchen gleamed with professional-grade appliances that Madison could hardly imagine using. A library filled with leather-bound books spoke of Matthew's intellectual nature. Each room was decorated in subtle, expensive taste, beautiful, but somehow impersonal, as if waiting for someone to truly make it a home. "And this is the staff," Matthew said as they entered the kitchen where several people were busy preparing breakfast. "Mrs. Martinez is our housekeeper, James is our chef, and Sarah handles general household management." Madison smiled warmly at each person, noting how they seemed to regard Matthew with both respect and genuine affection. Mrs. Martinez, a woman in her early 60s with kind eyes, stepped forward to squeeze Madison's hand. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cross," she said softly. "We're so happy to have you here." The sincerity in her voice made Madison's eyes water slightly. "Thank you. Please, call me Madison." Throughout the day, Matthew was the perfect host and husband, attentive, loving, and patient as Madison adjusted to her new surroundings. He answered her questions about the house systems, showed her how to work the elaborate security features, and made sure she felt comfortable giving instructions to the staff. Yet as evening approached, Madison noticed subtle changes in his demeanor. His responses became shorter, his gaze more intense. By the time they retired to their bedroom, the strange, watchful Matthew from that morning had returned. While Madison prepared for bed in the enormous master bathroom, she could feel him observing her through the open door. When she emerged in her nightgown, he sat in the same chair as that morning, his expression once again unreadable in the dim light. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently, perching on the edge of their king-sized bed. "Of course," Matthew replied, but his voice held that same distant quality. "I just like watching you." Madison nodded, not knowing how to respond. She slipped under the covers, hyper-aware of his continued gaze. Eventually, Matthew changed and joined her in bed, falling asleep almost immediately. His breathing became deep and regular, but Madison remained wide awake, her mind racing. The mattress was the most comfortable she'd ever experienced. The sheets were silky, smooth against her skin, and the room temperature was perfect. Yet sleep eluded her. She turned carefully onto her side, studying her husband's peaceful, sleeping face in the faint light from the city below. During the day, Matthew was everything she'd dreamed of: kind, generous, loving. He'd given her a fairy tale wedding and brought her to this amazing home. His gentle manner with the staff showed his true character. So why did he become this other person as darkness fell? Why did his warm brown eyes turn so intense and unreadable? What was he looking for when he watched her so intently? Madison remembered how quickly their relationship had progressed. Meeting at a charity function where she was representing, her community health organization, whirlwind dates at expensive restaurants, and a proposal after just 3 months. She'd been swept off her feet by his charm and genuine desire to help others through his philanthropy. Even now, she didn't doubt his feelings for her, but there was clearly something he wasn't telling her. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows as Madison lay there, her thoughts chasing themselves in circles. She was a professional caregiver, trained to notice when something wasn't quite right with people. All her instincts told her there was more to Matthew's nighttime behavior than simple, newlywed fascination. Yet she also knew that sometimes people needed time to reveal their deeper truths. She rolled onto her back, staring at the shadowy ceiling. The sheets rustled softly with her movement, but Matthew didn't stir. In the quiet darkness, Madison made a decision. She would be patient. She would observe and try to understand. Most importantly, she would trust her heart, which still told her that beneath this strange behavior was the good man she'd fallen in love with. Tomorrow would be another day. Perhaps in time, Matthew would feel safe enough to share whatever burden caused this nighttime transformation. Until then, Madison would do what she did best: offer compassion, understanding, and unwavering support. Yet, as she finally began drifting towards sleep in the early hours of the morning, one question continued to nag at her. What secrets lay behind Matthew Cross's unreadable nighttime gaze? Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom as Madison stirred awake. The space beside her was empty and cool to the touch. On Matthew's pillow lay a handwritten note in his precise handwriting. Early video conference with our Singapore Foundation. Back this evening. Love, M. Madison stretched and sat up, trying to shake off the lingering unease from another night of Matthew's silent vigil. The mansion felt different in the morning light, less imposing, more like the luxurious home it was meant to be. Still, she couldn't quite settle her racing thoughts. After a quiet breakfast served by Mrs. Martinez, Madison retreated to the private sitting room adjoining the master suite. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed her sister's number. "Tell me everything." Olivia demanded as soon as she picked up. "How's married life in Billionaire land?" Madison sank into a plush armchair, drawing her knees up to her chest. "It's complicated, Liv." "Complicated how? Is he not treating you right?" The protective edge in Olivia's voice was immediate. No, nothing like that." Madison hurried to explain. "During the day, Matthew is wonderful, thoughtful, loving, everything I fell in love with. But at night—" She paused, unsure how to describe it without sounding paranoid. "At night what?" Olivia prompted. Madison sighed. "He watches me, like sits in a chair and just stares, for hours sometimes. And his expression, it's like he's looking for something, but I don't know what." "Girl, that's creepy," Olivia declared. "Have you talked to him about it?" "Not yet. I mean, how do I even bring that up? Hey, honey, why do you get all weird and watchful after dark?" Madison attempted to laugh, but it came out strained. "Madison." Olivia's voice grew serious. "You know I support you, but something isn't right there. The man's got issues he's not telling you about." I know. Madison stood and began pacing the room. "But Liv, I love him. You should see how he is with his staff, how passionate he is about his charitable work. There's such goodness in him." "Loving someone doesn't mean ignoring red flags," Olivia pointed out gently. "I'm not ignoring them," Madison insisted. "I'm just trying to understand. He's been through something. I can feel it. He needs time." The sisters talked for another hour, Olivia offering both support and cautionary advice. By the time they hung up, Madison felt both better and worse, comforted by her sister's love, but more certain than ever that something was wrong. She spent the rest of the day exploring the mansion more thoroughly, trying to keep herself busy. The staff moved efficiently around her, always polite, but clearly still adjusting to having a new mistress of the house. Madison found herself drawn to the library, a 2-story room lined with leather-bound books and featuring a cozy reading nook overlooking the city. As the sun began to set, she heard the elevator arrive at their floor. Matthew strode in, his suit jacket draped over one arm and a gorgeous bouquet of fresh flowers in his free hand. "These reminded me of you," he said, presenting them with a warm smile. "Bright and beautiful." Madison accepted the flowers, breathing in their sweet scent. "They're lovely, thank you." She studied his face, open, loving, so different from his nighttime demeanor. They shared a quiet dinner, Matthew telling her about the video conference and his plans for expanding their medical aid programs in Southeast Asia. His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as he described the potential impact, and Madison felt her heart swell with pride and affection. Later, as they prepared for bed, Matthew was attentive and gentle, pulling her close and pressing soft kisses to her temple. Madison almost convinced herself she'd imagined the strangeness of previous nights. But at midnight, she woke to the familiar sound of Matthew leaving the bed. Through barely opened eyes, she watched him settle into that same chair, his gaze fixed upon her with that now familiar intensity. Her heart began to race, though she forced her breathing to remain steady. Hours passed. The city lights cast strange shadows across Matthew's face as he maintained his silent vigil. Eventually, he returned to bed, but Madison remained awake, her mind whirling with questions and concern. When morning came, she was already dressed and waiting at the breakfast table when Matthew joined her. He looked perfectly normal, handsome in his tailored suit, smiling warmly as he kissed her cheek. Madison took a deep breath. "Matthew, can we talk about something?" "Of course, darling." He sat beside her, spreading butter on his toast with careful precision. "Last night," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "I woke up and saw you watching me. Again. Is everything okay?" Matthew's smile never wavered as he reached over to squeeze her hand. "Everything's perfect. You're so beautiful when you sleep. Can you blame a man for wanting to admire his wife?" He leaned in to kiss her cheek again, but Madison noticed how his eyes didn't quite meet hers. The gesture felt like a deflection, however loving. "I just want to make sure you're sleeping enough." She tried again. "Don't worry about me," he said lightly, standing and checking his watch. "I have excellent stamina. Speaking of which, I need to head to the office. Dinner at 7? Madison nodded, forcing a small smile as he gathered his things and headed for the elevator. As soon as the doors closed behind him, her smile faded. She absently stirred her cooling coffee, mind already planning how to stay alert through the coming night. Something was definitely wrong, and she intended to figure out what it was. She might have accepted Matthew's explanation if it weren't for the way his eyes changed during these nighttime vigils, the warmth replaced by something almost desperate. No, this wasn't simple admiration. Her husband was searching for something in her sleeping face, and she needed to understand why. Mrs. Martinez appeared to clear the breakfast dishes, and Madison quickly composed herself. But beneath her calm exterior, she was already preparing for another long night of careful observation. She loved Matthew. That hadn't changed. But love meant facing difficult truths together, and she was determined to uncover whatever truth he was hiding in the darkness. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse as Madison adjusted Matthew's tie. The charity event would start in an hour, and she wanted everything to be perfect. Her fingers smoothed over the silk material, and Matthew caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "You look stunning," he said, his eyes warm and sincere as they swept over her emerald green dress. Madison's heart fluttered at his tenderness. These were the moments that made her fall in love with him, when his guard was completely down, and his affection flowed freely. She smoothed her hands over her dress, grateful that the staff had helped her select an outfit appropriate for a hospital wing dedication ceremony. The drive to the event was pleasant, with Matthew's hand resting comfortably on her knee as he told her about the new pediatric wing they were funding. His passion for helping others shone through in every word, making the contrast with his nighttime behavior even more puzzling. At the event, Matthew kept her close, his arm protectively around her waist as he introduced her to Denver's elite. "My wife, Madison," he would say with unmistakable pride, and each time his voice carried such genuine warmth that it made her chest tight with emotion. "The children will have access to state-of-the-art treatment facilities," Matthew explained to the gathered crowd during his speech. His hand reached for Madison's, drawing her closer to his side. "And thanks to my wife's experience in community health work, we're implementing new outreach programs to ensure no child falls through the cracks." Madison blinked in surprise. She hadn't known he'd incorporated her ideas into the project. The way he spoke about her contributions with such respect and admiration made her want to cry. Throughout the afternoon, she watched him work the room, noting how he remembered everyone's names, asked about their families, and listened intently to their concerns. This was the man she'd married, compassionate, focused, and deeply committed to making a difference. During a quiet moment while Matthew was speaking with some board members, Mrs. Richardson, one of the hospital's longest-serving nurses, approached Madison. "Your husband is a godsend," the older woman said, patting Madison's arm. "He visits the children's ward regularly, you know. Reads to them, brings them gifts. They adore him." Madison's throat tightened. "He has such a big heart. And he looks at you like you hung the moon." Mrs. Richardson added with a knowing smile. "It's wonderful to see him so happy." The ride home was filled with comfortable silence, Matthew's thumb drawing lazy circles on the back of her hand. Madison watched the city lights blur past, gathering her courage. Once they were home, as Matthew loosened his tie, Madison approached him. "Can we talk?" He turned to her, his expression open and attentive. "Of course, darling." "Would you—" She hesitated, then pressed on. "Would you sleep through the night with me? Actually sleep, I mean. No watching." Something flickered across his face, too quick to catch, before he smiled. "Of course. I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable. It won't happen again." Madison wanted to believe him. The way he pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and held her as they drifted off to sleep almost convinced her everything would be fine. But at 3:14 in the morning, she woke to that familiar sensation of being watched. Opening her eyes, she found Matthew in his usual spot, but something was different. His normally expressive face was completely blank, his eyes vacant as they fixed on her face. He might have been looking at a stranger. Fear crept up her spine, but she forced it down. This was Matthew, her husband, the man who had spoken so proudly of her just hours ago. Slowly, carefully, she extended her hand toward him. "Matthew?" she whispered, her fingers brushing his. He jerked as if shocked, his eyes widening with recognition, and something like horror. Before she could say another word, he turned away, his shoulders hunched with embarrassment or shame. "I'm sorry," he muttered, still not looking at her. "I'm so sorry." Madison sat up, her heart pounding. "Matthew, please talk to me. What's happening?" But he was already retreating to the bathroom, closing the door firmly behind him. Madison heard the water running, likely to mask any other sounds. She sat in the darkness, her mind racing. The vacant look in his eyes haunted her, so different from the man who had proudly introduced her as his wife mere hours ago. What changed in him at night? Why did he seem not to recognize her? The bathroom door remained closed, and Madison hugged her knees to her chest, forcing herself to think rationally. She loved Matthew. That wasn't in question. But his behavior was becoming increasingly concerning, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. Was she safe? The question felt like a betrayal, but she had to consider it. The staff clearly adored him. His public reputation was spotless, and during the day he was nothing but gentle and loving. Yet something was clearly wrong, something he was hiding. As the water continued to run, Madison made a decision. She needed answers, not just for her peace of mind, but for Matthew's well-being too. Whatever he was struggling with, whatever caused that vacant stare and compulsive watching, she had to understand it. She couldn't help him if she didn't know what they were facing. And she couldn't protect herself if she didn't know what she was dealing with. The man she'd married was in there somewhere, behind those vacant eyes and midnight vigils. She just had to figure out how to reach him. The water finally shut off, but the bathroom door remained closed. Madison lay back down, her mind already forming plans. Tomorrow she would begin her investigation in earnest. Someone had to know something about Matthew's past that could explain his behavior. She would find answers one way or another. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors as Madison carefully balanced a steaming cup of coffee. She had chosen Matthew's favorite mug, the simple navy blue one he seemed to prefer over the expensive designer cups that filled their kitchen cabinets. The rich aroma of freshly ground beans wafted up as she made her way toward his home office. Her bare feet moved silently across the plush carpet of the hallway. She'd dressed carefully that morning in a casual but put-together outfit, soft grey leggings and an oversized cream sweater that made her dark skin glow. Maybe if she looked approachable, Matthew would feel more inclined to open up to her. As she neared his office door, she heard his voice, warm and professional as always during business hours. Madison paused, not wanting to interrupt if he was in the middle of something important. But then she caught a few words that made her freeze. Celine, I know you're worried, but I'm handling it, Matthew was saying, his tone tighter than usual. Madison's heart skipped a beat at the mention of his sister's name. Dr. Celine Cross was something of a mystery. Madison had only met her briefly at the wedding, where the accomplished neurologist had regarded her with an unreadable expression. No, it hasn't happened again. Matthew continued, tension clear in his voice. You don't need to come check on me. Madison doesn't need to know about... He broke off as Madison's soft knock echoed through the door. There was a pause. Then, come in. Madison pushed open the heavy wooden door, trying to keep her expression neutral despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. I thought you might like some coffee, she said, managing a smile. Matthew's face was a careful mask as he covered the phone with one hand. Thank you, but I'm in the middle of something important. Could you leave it on the desk? The dismissal in his tone was subtle, but clear. Gone was the man who had kissed her so tenderly that morning, replaced by someone cool and distant. Madison set down the coffee, fighting back a wave of hurt at his altered demeanor. Of course, she murmured, turning to leave. As she closed the door behind her, she heard him resume his conversation with his sister, his voice too low now to make out the words. Standing in the hallway, Madison took a deep breath to steady herself. Rather than return to their living quarters, she found herself wandering toward the West Wing, the only part of the mansion she hadn't properly explored yet. The wing stretched out before her, its high ceilings and pristine walls giving no hint of secrets or mysteries. But as she moved deeper into the wing, something caught her attention. Between two tall windows, partially hidden behind an ornate tapestry, was a door she hadn't noticed during the house tour. Unlike the other doors in the mansion, this one had no elegant handle, only a heavy-duty deadbolt lock that seemed out of place in the luxurious surroundings. Madison's fingers itched to touch it, to try the handle even though she knew it would be locked. What could be behind that door that required such security? And why hadn't Matthew mentioned it during their tour? The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Matthew emerged from his office for lunch, once again the attentive husband, but Madison couldn't forget his earlier coldness or the mysterious phone call with his sister. The locked door lurked in the back of her mind like an unfinished puzzle. After dinner, as they sat in the formal dining room finishing their dessert, Matthew cleared his throat. I need to go to Washington, D.C. tonight, he announced, not quite meeting her eyes. There's an urgent situation with one of our major charity initiatives that requires my personal attention. Madison set down her fork, the chocolate mousse suddenly tasteless in her mouth. Tonight? How long? Will you be gone? Just a few days, he assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. I'm sorry for the short notice. The jet is already being prepared. 2 hours later, Madison stood in the cavernous entryway, watching as Matthew's driver loaded his overnight bag into the waiting car. Matthew pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I'll call you when I land, he promised, his hands warm on her shoulders. For a moment, he was again the man she'd fallen in love with, gentle and present. But as he pulled away, Madison caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Relief? Guilt? Before she could analyze it, he was gone, the heavy front doors closing behind him with a decisive thud. The sound echoed through the massive space, emphasizing how alone she suddenly was. Madison wrapped her arms around herself, feeling small in the vast entryway. The mansion seemed different without Matthew's presence, emptier, more mysterious. Her thoughts drifted back to the locked door in the West Wing. Now, standing alone in the echoing silence, the image of that heavy deadbolt seemed more significant than ever. What secrets was this house hiding? What secrets was her husband hiding? The gentle hum of the climate control system was the only sound as Madison stood there, processing the sudden solitude. Everything felt slightly surreal. The perfectly polished floors, the elaborate crystal chandelier overhead, the knowledge that she was now alone in this massive space that still didn't quite feel like home. Sunlight streamed through the mansion's windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors as Madison paced in Matthew's home office. She'd woken early, unable to shake the feeling that answers to her husband's strange behavior lay somewhere in this house. Her fingers traced the edge of his mahogany desk, hesitating before pulling open the top drawer. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room, feeling guilty for snooping. But the nighttime watching, the locked door, the sudden trip, something wasn't right, and she needed to know what. The drawer slid open smoothly, revealing neat stacks of papers and office supplies. As she carefully shifted through them, a small brass key caught her eye. It was ornate but tiny, the kind used for decorative boxes rather than doors. Madison lifted it, turning it over in her palm. She'd seen similar keys in antique stores, used for jewelry boxes or old writing desks. Her heart pounding, she slipped the key into her pocket. It probably wouldn't fit the heavy deadbolt in the West Wing, but she had to try. The house felt different in daylight, less intimidating, as if giving her permission to explore its secrets. Making her way to the West Wing, Madison's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. The morning sun caught the threads of the tapestry that partially concealed the mysterious door, making them shimmer. With trembling fingers, she pushed aside the heavy fabric. To her surprise, when she examined the lock more closely, she noticed something she'd missed before. Behind the modern deadbolt was an older, more delicate keyhole. Taking a deep breath, Madison inserted the small brass key. It fit perfectly. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a room that made Madison's breath catch in her throat. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dozens of portraits covering the walls. But it wasn't the quantity that made her stumble backward. It was the subject. Every single portrait showed a woman who could have been Madison's twin. "This can't be real," she whispered, stepping into the room. The woman in the paintings had her same dark skin tone, the same high cheekbones, the same curve of her lips. But the eyes held a different soul, a different story. Each portrait was signed and dated, and beneath them all was the same name, Alina Cross. Madison's legs felt weak as she moved deeper into the room. An easel stood in one corner, an unfinished sketch still clipped to it. A drafting table held more drawings, these done in quick, emotional strokes, as if the artist had been trying to capture a fading memory. On a polished side table, a stack of newspapers caught her eye. With shaking hands, she picked up the top one. The headline read, "Local artist presumed dead in boating accident." Below was a photo of the woman from the portraits, Alina Cross, Matthew's first wife, smiling at the camera. The article was dated 5 years ago. "Oh, God," Madison breathed, sinking to the floor with the newspaper in her lap. This was why Matthew stared at her at night. This was why he'd been so quick to propose after only 6 months of dating. She wasn't just his second wife, she was a living reminder of his first. For hours, Madison sat among the scattered evidence of Matthew's past life. She read every article about the accident, every letter Alina had written to Matthew during their marriage. There were sketches everywhere, some by Alina, who had been an artist, and many by Matthew himself, trying to preserve her face in his memory. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. Madison hugged her knees to her chest, overwhelmed by the weight of her discovery. Every night, Matthew woke up and stared at her, because in the darkness, she became Alina. Their physical similarity wasn't just a coincidence. It was the reason he'd been drawn to her in the first place. The sound of the front door opening downstairs made Madison freeze. She heard footsteps, confident and purposeful, moving through the house. Then a voice called out, "Madison?" It was Dr. Celine Cross. Madison's heart thundered in her chest as the footsteps approached the West Wing. She couldn't move, couldn't hide the evidence of what she'd discovered. The door to the room swung open wider, and there stood Matthew's sister, her expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "I got an alert from security that this room had been accessed," Celine said, quietly, her eyes taking in the scattered newspapers and letters around Madison. "I was afraid this day would come." Madison looked up at her sister-in-law, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she whispered. Celine stepped into the portrait-filled room, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. "Come with me," she said gently, extending her hand to Madison. "There's something you need to understand." Madison hesitated, glancing at the scattered newspapers around her, then accepted Celine's help to stand. Her legs felt numb from sitting on the floor for so long. Together, they walked in silence through the mansion's corridors until they reached the formal sitting room, its cream-colored walls a stark contrast to the gallery of faces they'd left behind. "Please sit." Celine gestured to one of the plush armchairs. Madison sank into it, watching as Matthew's sister settled across from her, smoothing her tailored skirt with practiced precision. "What I'm about to tell you," Celine began, then paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's not just about Alina's death. It's about what happened to Matthew afterward." Madison leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The way he stares at night, it's because I look like her, isn't it?" "Yes and no," Celine replied. "Matthew suffers from a condition called prosopagnosia, facial blindness. But his case is unusual. It's not genetic. It developed after Alina's disappearance, triggered by severe trauma." The medical term hung heavy in the air between them. Madison's throat felt dry. "What exactly does that mean?" "During episodes, which usually occur at night, Matthew cannot recognize faces, not even his own reflection." Celine's professional demeanor softened with sadness. "Imagine waking up and looking in the mirror at a stranger. Imagine everyone you know suddenly having unfamiliar faces." Madison thought about all those nights. Matthew sitting in that chair, staring at her with that vacant expression. "But he recognizes me during the day," she said quietly. "During the day, when his mind is active and engaged, he can usually manage the condition. But at night, when his defenses are down..." Celine took a deep breath. "There's only one face he ever recognizes during these episodes, Alina's." The revelation hit Madison like a physical blow. She pressed her hand to her mouth, remembering every tender moment, every loving glance Matthew had given her. How many of those had been meant for someone else? "We should have told you before the wedding," Celine admitted, regret evident in her voice. "But Matthew was afraid. Afraid you would leave if you knew the truth. Afraid of losing another chance at happiness. He's been in therapy for years, trying to cope with both the facial blindness and his grief. So at night, when he looks at me..." Madison couldn't finish the sentence. "He sees Alina," Celine confirmed gently. "It's not that he doesn't love you, Madison. He does, deeply. But his trauma has created this window where his mind can only process certain facial features. And you look exactly like his dead wife," Madison finished, her voice barely a whisper. They sat in heavy silence as the afternoon light faded outside the tall windows. Finally, Madison asked, "Does he know? When he's having an episode, does he realize what's happening?" "Sometimes," Celine replied, Other times he's lost in the moment, trapped between past and present. It's why he's so embarrassed when you catch him watching you. In those moments of clarity, he realizes what he's doing. Madison stood abruptly, needing to move, to process. She walked to the window, watching as shadows lengthened across the manicured lawn. "I love him," she said finally. "But I don't know if I can compete with a ghost." "You're not meant to compete," Celine said softly. "Matthew chose you, Madison, not because you look like Alina, but because you brought light back into his life. The similarity in appearance may have initially drawn him to you, but he fell in love with your heart." Hours later, after Celine had left, Madison lay alone in the massive bed she shared with Matthew. Sleep eluded her as her mind replayed every moment since their wedding. Every midnight vigil, every confused glance, every morning kiss that followed. The ceiling fan spun lazily above her, casting shifting shadows across the walls. When the grandfather clock in the hallway began to strike midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the empty house, Madison threw back the covers. She couldn't stay in this bed, not tonight. Her bare feet carried her back to the portrait room, drawn there by an urge she couldn't explain. In the darkness, Alina's faces seemed to watch her from every wall. Madison found herself standing before the largest portrait, illuminated only by moonlight streaming through the windows. In it, Alina wore a simple white dress, her smile radiant and knowing. It was like looking into a mirror that showed a different version of herself. Same features, different soul. Madison reached out, her fingers hovering just above the canvas. "Who am I to him?" she whispered to the painted smile. "When he looks at me, which one of us does he really see?" The portrait offered no answers, only that eternal smile that now seemed tinged with sadness. Madison stood there in her nightgown, surrounded by the faces of a woman who had come before her, wondering if she had married a man who could only see her through the lens of his loss, a man who looked at her and saw nothing but a ghost of his past. Dawn crept slowly over the Denver skyline as Madison sat in the kitchen, clutching her phone. She had barely slept, spending most of the night moving between their bedroom and the portrait room, trying to make sense of everything. The house staff moved quietly around her, preparing for the day while casting concerned glances her way. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed Matthew's number. Each ring seemed to last forever until finally his voice came through, somehow both familiar and strange. "Madison." His tone was flat, exhausted. "Good morning." "Matthew," she said softly, her heart aching at the distance in his voice. "How are you?" "Fine. Busy. The meetings here are challenging." He paused, and she could hear papers shuffling in the background. "Is everything all right there?" Madison swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I spoke with Celine yesterday." The silence that followed was deafening. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I see. Why didn't you tell me?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "About your condition, about Alina, about everything? Madison, He stopped, and she heard him take a shaky breath. "This isn't a conversation we should have over the phone." "Then when, Matthew? When were you going to tell me that you can't recognize faces? That you wake up every night because you don't know who I am?" Her voice cracked. "That I look exactly like your dead wife?" "I have to go," he said quickly. "There's an emergency meeting. We'll talk when I return." The line went dead before she could respond. Madison set her phone down with trembling fingers, tears finally spilling over. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly housekeeper, appeared silently at her side with a cup of tea and a gentle pat on her shoulder before discreetly withdrawing. An hour later, Madison found herself standing outside Celine's medical office. She hadn't planned to come here, but her feet had carried her anyway, desperate for answers. The receptionist recognized her immediately and ushered her back to Celine's private office. Celine looked up from her computer, her expression softening with understanding. "Madison, I was wondering if I'd see you today. I need to know everything," Madison said, sinking into one of the leather chairs across from Celine's desk. "No more protecting Matthew. No more half-truths. I deserve to know." Celine removed her reading glasses and rubbed her temples. "You're right. You do deserve the truth." She stood and moved to close her office door before returning to her seat. "What do you want to know?" "The first time he saw me," Madison said. "What really happened?" Celine's professional demeanor cracked slightly, showing a flash of remembered worry. "It was at that charity gala for children's literacy. You were volunteering, serving drinks. Matthew was giving his usual speech about educational equality when he saw you across the room." She paused, collecting her thoughts. He stopped mid-sentence. Just froze. I thought he was having a stroke. His face went white, and he gripped the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. Someone else had to finish the speech while I got him off stage. Madison remembered that night, though she hadn't noticed any disruption. She'd been too busy making sure the donors' glasses stayed full. What happened next? He was convinced he was hallucinating. Celine continued. He kept saying, "It's Alina. She's here." I had to show him the old news articles about the accident on my phone to convince him it couldn't be her. He nearly fainted when I suggested he go talk to you. The memory of their first conversation took on a new, painful context. His nervous energy, the way his hands had shaken as he introduced himself, how intensely he had stared at her face. It hadn't been just attraction. It had been recognition of a ghost. "Why didn't he tell me then?" Madison asked, her voice small. "Before we fell in love, before we got married?" Celine's expression filled with sympathy. "He tried, Madison, so many times, but every time he got close, he'd panic. He was terrified that if he told you about his condition, about Alina, about how similar you look, he was afraid you'd think he only wanted you because of her." She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Which isn't true, by the way. Yes, your appearance initially shocked him, but he fell in love with you. Your kindness, your strength, your joy. He told me once that you made him feel whole again." "But how can I believe that now?" Madison whispered. "How can I know if he sees me or just her reflection?" "Because during the day, when his mind is clear, he knows exactly who you are," Celine insisted. "The night episodes, they're not about love or choice. They're about trauma and a brain that's trying to heal." Madison stood abruptly, needing to move. She paced the length of Celine's office, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "He should have told me. Before the wedding, before I fell so deeply in love with him that the thought of losing him feels like dying." Her voice broke. "I would have understood. I would have helped him." "I know," Celine said softly. "I told him the same thing. But 5 years of grief and guilt and mental struggle, it changes a person, makes them afraid of hope." Later that evening, Madison stood in the massive kitchen of the penthouse, mechanically chopping vegetables for a simple dinner. The staff had offered to cook, but she needed the distraction, the simple rhythm of the knife against the cutting board. She had spent the afternoon in a daze, walking through the city streets, trying to reconcile the man she knew with this new reality. Every memory now held a double image, Matthew's loving smiles overlaid with the knowledge of his hidden pain, their tender moments shadowed by the ghost of another woman who shared her face. The sunset painted the kitchen in shades of orange and gold as Madison plated her small meal, just enough for one. She carried it to the window-lined dining room, settling into a chair that faced the sprawling city below. Denver's lights were beginning to twinkle on, one by one, like stars being born in the growing darkness. She took a bite of food without tasting it, her mind still swirling with questions. Had Matthew married her out of love or desperation? Was she his second chance at happiness, or just a replacement for what he'd lost? The city lights blurred as tears filled her eyes again. Madison set her fork down, no longer hungry. She pressed her hand against the cool glass of the window, watching the city pulse with life below. Somewhere out there, Matthew was in another city, probably sitting in another window-lined room, carrying the weight of his secrets. And here she sat, in the home they shared, feeling more like a ghost than a wife. The lights of Denver continued to shine, offering no answers as Madison remained at the window, lost in the space between what she had believed and what she now knew, uncertain of her place in the heart of the man she loved. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the penthouse windows when the elevator chimed, announcing Celine's return. Madison looked up from her spot on the living room couch, where she'd been absently flipping through a magazine without really seeing the pages. Celine stepped out, carrying a weathered cardboard box that seemed to have seen better days. Her normally pristine appearance was slightly rumpled, suggesting she'd spent time digging through storage to find whatever she held. "I thought you should see these," Celine said softly, setting the box down on the coffee table. "If you're going to understand Matthew, really understand him, you need to know what those years were like." Madison sat up straighter, her heart beating faster as Celine opened the box. Inside were medical files, notebooks, and what appeared to be several leather-bound journals. "These are Matthew's personal journals from the worst period," Celine explained, lifting out one of the leather volumes. "He kept them as part of his therapy, documenting his episodes and his feelings. I'm probably betraying his trust by showing you, but—" She paused, meeting Madison's eyes. "I think he needs you to know." With trembling hands, Madison accepted the journal Celine offered. The leather was soft from use, the pages slightly warped as though they'd absorbed tears. She opened it carefully, as if handling something precious and fragile. The first entry was dated 5 years ago, just weeks after Alina's accident. Matthew's normally elegant handwriting was shaky, some words crossed out or smudged. "I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror today. Stared at my reflection for 20 minutes before Celine found me. The face looking back might as well have been a stranger's. The doctors say it's prosopagnosia, face blindness, triggered by trauma. But how can I lead the foundation if I can't recognize my own board members? How can I function when every face becomes a blank mask after sunset?" Madison's throat tightened as she turned the pages, reading Matthew's raw pain. "The only face I can still see clearly is Alina's. Even in photographs, even in darkness, I know her. The doctors say it's because her face was the last thing my brain processed normally, before the trauma took hold. Sometimes I think I see her in crowds, but it's never her. It will never be her again." Celine quietly pulled out medical records, spreading them on the table. "He saw specialists all over the world," she explained. "The episodes were worst at night, when his mind was tired. During the day, he could compensate with other visual cues, hair color, clothing, voice. But at night—" Madison nodded, understanding now why he sat watching her sleep. In those dark hours, when his mind betrayed him, he saw Alina's face, the only face he could still recognize. She continued reading, the entries growing more desperate as months passed. "I pray every night for healing, for the ability to see faces again, any face besides hers. Living with this condition feels like being trapped in a world of strangers, except for the ghost of my wife who haunts every reflection, every photograph, every dream." Then she found the entry that made her heart stop. It was dated just days after their first meeting. "I saw her today. Not Alina, but someone who could be her twin. My heart nearly stopped. For a moment I thought God had answered my prayers with a miracle. But it's not possible. Her name is Madison Ellis, and she's everything Alina wasn't. A social worker instead of a socialite, warm where Alina was reserved, gentle where Alina was intense. But her face is identical. Is this a second chance or a divine test? Am I meant to heal or to prove I can love someone for who they are, not just for a face I can recognize? Tears splashed onto the page, and Madison quickly wiped them away, not wanting to damage the journal. She looked up at Celine, who was watching her with concern. "He wrote about you constantly after that," Celine said softly. "About how different you were from Alina, despite looking so similar. About how your kindness made him feel safe, how your laughter made him forget his pain. He was terrified of telling you the truth, afraid you'd think his love wasn't real." Madison's fingers traced the words on the page, feeling the indentations where Matthew's pen had pressed too hard in moments of emotion. "He should have trusted me," she whispered. "Fear isn't rational," Celine replied, "especially when it's tangled up with love and loss and hope." They spent hours going through the box. Medical reports detailed the progression of Matthew's condition, how it worsened with stress and fatigue. Therapy notes showed his struggle to accept his new reality. And the journals. The journals revealed a man fighting to find himself in a world where faces kept slipping away like water through his fingers. As evening settled over Denver, Celine gathered the materials back into the box, leaving only the journal Madison had been reading. "Keep it," she said quietly. "I think you need it more than the medical archives do right now." After Celine left, Madison curled up in bed with the journal, reading entry after entry until her eyes burned with exhaustion. She finally drifted off near midnight, the journal clutched to her chest. Her dreams were troubled, filled with scenes she'd read about. She saw Alina's accident as Matthew had described it. A sunny day turned tragic, a boat capsizing in suddenly rough waters, a beloved face disappearing beneath dark waves. She woke with tears on her cheeks, her heart aching for both the woman who was lost and the man who couldn't forget her face. The city lights twinkled outside her window as Madison wiped her eyes, feeling the weight of everything she'd learned. Her love for Matthew hadn't diminished. If anything, knowing the depth of his suffering made her love him more. But the need for honesty between them had become an almost physical ache. She picked up the journal again, reading Matthew's words about their first date, their engagement, their wedding day. In each entry she found both his joy in their love and his fear of losing it. His words painted a picture of a man torn between past and present, between grief and hope, between guilt and healing. Dawn was beginning to lighten the sky when Madison finally set the journal aside. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but her heart felt oddly lighter. Despite everything, the secrets, the pain, the ghost of Alina that haunted their nights, she wasn't ready to give up on their love. Matthew needed healing, but he also needed truth. And maybe, she thought, and sleep finally claimed her, they could find both together. Morning light filtered through the penthouse windows as Madison stood before her closet, carefully selecting a soft blue dress that Matthew had once said brought out the warmth in her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned it up, rehearsing in her mind the words she needed to say to her husband when he returned from Washington, D.C. The bedroom mirror reflected her determined expression as she applied light makeup, trying to steady her nerves. After reading Matthew's journal entries all night, she felt both more understanding of his struggles and more certain that they needed complete honesty between them. No more secrets, she whispered to her reflection, smoothing her hair. We face this together. Her phone buzzed on the dresser, Celine's name lighting up the screen. Madison answered, expecting updates about Matthew's travel schedule. "Madison." Celine's voice sounded strange, tighter than usual. "Are you sitting down?" "I'm standing, but you should sit." There was a rustle of papers on Celine's end. Something's happened. Something impossible. Madison sank onto the edge of her bed, her heart beginning to race. "What is it?" "The police just contacted me. They've reopened Alina's case." Celine took a shaking breath. There's new evidence suggesting she might be alive. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Madison gripped the bedspread, her knuckles turning white. "What?" she whispered. "A witness came forward last week, a former Coast Guard officer who'd retired to a small fishing village in Mexico. He described rescuing a woman matching Alina's description years ago, after finding her clinging to debris from a capsized boat. She had no identification, no memory of who she was." Madison's free hand pressed against her chest, feeling her thundering heartbeat. "But that was 5 years ago. Why is he only coming forward now?" He saw a recent article about Matthew's charitable work that included a photo of Alina. He recognized her immediately. Celine's voice softened. "Madison, I know this must be overwhelming." "Does Matthew know?" "Not yet. He's been in meetings all morning. I wanted to tell you first, to prepare you." There was a pause. "The authorities are already following leads in Mexico, if it really is her." Madison closed her eyes, remembering the portrait room filled with Alina's face. Her face. "When is Matthew coming home?" "His flight lands in 2 hours. I'll pick him up myself. Try to break the news gently." Celine hesitated. "Madison, whatever happens, please remember that my brother loves you. This situation is unprecedented." After ending the call, Madison sat motionless on the bed, trying to process everything. The woman whose face had haunted Matthew's nights, whose memory filled an entire room of their home, might still be breathing, still existing somewhere in the world. Hours crawled by like years. Madison paced the penthouse, jumped at every sound, and found herself returning again and again to the portrait room. She stood before Alina's largest painting, studying the face that mirrored her own. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Where have you been?" The sound of the front door opening sent her heart into her throat. She hurried to the entryway, where Matthew was just stepping inside. He looked exhausted, his suit wrinkled from travel, his face pale. Celine stood beside him, one hand on his arm as if to steady him. "Matthew," Madison said softly. He turned toward her voice, and she saw immediately that he was fighting an episode. His eyes were wide and uncertain, his hands slightly shaking as he reached for her face. "I can't," he started, his fingers trembling as they traced her features. "The flight, the stress, I can feel it coming on." Madison stepped closer, letting him touch her face, understanding now why he needed this contact. "I'm here," she whispered. His fingers mapped her cheekbones, her jaw, her nose, trying to hold on to recognition before it slipped away. Tears began rolling down his cheeks as he struggled to focus on her features. "Madison," he choked out, his voice breaking. "Madison, I can see you, but I don't know why." Madison helped Matthew into their bedroom, his exhausted form heavy against her shoulder. His earlier breakdown had drained what little energy remained after his flight, leaving him barely able to keep his eyes open. She carefully removed his suit jacket and shoes while he sat motionless on the edge of their bed, his face blank with fatigue. "Try to rest," she whispered, easing him back against the pillows. His hand caught hers weakly. "Stay," he murmured, but his eyes were already closing. Within moments, his breathing deepened into sleep. Madison stood watching him, her heart aching. The strong, confident man she'd married seemed so vulnerable now, wrapped in the shadows of their dimly lit room. She pulled the blanket over him gently, then slipped into the hallway where Celine waited, clutching a thick manila envelope. "The police report just came in," Celine said softly, leading Madison away from the bedroom door. "The witness testimony checks out completely. They've been able to trace Alina's movements through several small coastal towns in Mexico over the past 5 years." Madison leaned against the wall, feeling suddenly unsteady. "She's really alive?" "Yes." Celine pulled several documents from the envelope. "She was found severely injured, with no identification and no memory. A local family took her in while she recovered physically, but her memories only started returning about 6 months ago." "6 months," Madison echoed. "She's known who she is for 6 months?" Celine's expression tightened with sympathy. She needed time to process everything, to work through her trauma with professionals, but now— She hesitated, then continued gently. "She's requested a meeting with Matthew. She wants to see him in person." Madison closed her eyes, remembering the portrait room filled with Alina's face, her face. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "When?" "She's willing to wait until Matthew has time to prepare himself emotionally, but she's already in Denver." The news hit Madison like a physical blow. Somewhere in this very city, the woman whose memory had shaped so much of her marriage was waiting to reclaim her place in Matthew's life. The next morning dawned grey and cool, matching Madison's mood as she wandered through the mansion. She traced her fingers along familiar surfaces, the smooth marble countertops in the kitchen where she'd learned to cook Matthew's favourite meals, the antique sideboard in the dining room where they'd shared countless conversations over coffee, the soft leather of his study chair, where she'd often found him working late into the night. Everything looked the same, yet felt different now. Each touch reminded her of how tentative her claim to this life had become. She paused before a large window in the living room, watching clouds drift across the Denver skyline. The city stretched out before her, and somewhere in that sprawl of buildings and streets, Alina waited. The day passed in a blur of quiet moments and racing thoughts. Matthew remained asleep, his body finally surrendering to the exhaustion of recent events. Madison checked on him periodically, but otherwise kept her distance, lost in her own internal struggle. As sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, she found herself standing in their bedroom doorway, watching Matthew's peaceful face. The decision she'd been avoiding all day crystallized in her heart. Moving quietly, she retrieved a suitcase from their closet and began carefully packing some of her belongings. She selected enough clothes for a few days, her essential toiletries, and the worn paperback novel she'd been reading. Each item she placed in the suitcase felt like acknowledging a painful truth. She needed to step back, to give Matthew space to process Alina's return without feeling trapped by obligations to her. The guest room down the hall had always been ready for visitors, though they'd never used it. Madison wheeled her suitcase inside, taking in the tastefully decorated but impersonal space. The bed was smaller than the one she shared with Matthew, the sheets crisp and unused. The lamp on the bedside table cast a soft, somewhat uneven light across the room. She unpacked her things methodically, hanging clothes in the closet and arranging her personal items on the dresser. Each action felt both right and terribly wrong, necessary but heartbreaking. Finally, with nothing left to organize, Madison sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firmer than she was used to, another small reminder of how much had changed in just 24 hours. She clasped her hands in her lap, closing her eyes as emotion welled up inside her. "God," she whispered into the quiet room, her voice trembling, "I need your strength now more than ever. Help me face whatever comes next with grace. Help me remember that love sometimes means stepping aside. Help me be strong enough to do what's right, even when it hurts." The lamp flickered softly, its unsteady light casting shifting shadows on the wall. Madison watched the play of light and darkness, feeling very small and alone in the unfamiliar room. She remained there, still and silent, as night settled fully over the mansion, praying for the strength to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Madison woke before dawn, watching pale light creep across the unfamiliar ceiling of the guest room. The bed felt too empty, too quiet without Matthew's steady breathing beside her. She rose quietly, going through her morning routine with mechanical precision, finding comfort in the familiar rituals of getting ready for work. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed dark circles under her eyes, but she carefully applied her makeup, determined to maintain her composure. The routine of preparing for her day as a community health worker grounded her, reminding her that she had purpose beyond the walls of this mansion and its complicated emotions. The kitchen was silent when she entered, though the staff had already set out fresh coffee. Madison poured herself a cup, breathing in the rich aroma as she made a light breakfast of toast and fruit. She left a note for Matthew, keeping it simple. "At work today, take care of yourself." The crisp morning air felt refreshing as she walked to her car. Denver was just beginning to stir, the streets gradually filling with commuter traffic. Madison felt her shoulders relax slightly as she drove away from the mansion, heading toward the senior care facility where she spent her days. Miss Eleanor, one of her favorite clients, brightened immediately when Madison entered her room. The elderly woman's white hair was perfectly coiffed, and her eyes twinkled with warmth. "There's my angel," Miss Eleanor said, reaching for Madison's hand. "I was hoping you'd be here today." Madison squeezed the weathered hand gently. "Wouldn't miss our Thursday visit, Miss Eleanor. How are you feeling?" As she checked Miss Eleanor's vital signs and reviewed her medication schedule, Madison found herself drawn into the older woman's stories about her late husband. 52 years we had together," Miss Eleanor mused. "And you know what? Every single one of those years taught me something new about love." Madison's hand stilled momentarily as she adjusted Miss Eleanor's pillows. "What do you mean?" "Oh, honey." Miss Eleanor patted Madison's arm. "Love isn't just one thing. It grows and changes. Sometimes it's passionate, sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes it hurts so much you think you can't breathe. But real love always wants what's best for the other person, even when it's hard." Tears pricked at Madison's eyes, but she blinked them away, focusing on straightening Miss Eleanor's blanket. Throughout the morning, her other clients offered similar moments of unexpected wisdom. Mr. Chen spoke about forgiveness while she helped him with his physical therapy exercises. Mrs. Rodriguez shared stories of faith and resilience as Madison reviewed her care plan. These seniors had lived through loves and losses, joys and sorrows. Their strength and grace touched something deep in Madison's heart, helping her find her own resilience. By early afternoon, Madison returned to the mansion, her emotional armor somewhat fortified by the day's interactions. She found Matthew in his study, standing by the window. He turned when she entered, and her heart clenched at the mixture of grief and uncertainty in his eyes. "Madison," he said softly, "I was hoping to see you before." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Before you meet Alina," Madison finished for him, keeping her voice steady. Matthew crossed the room to stand before her. "I need to apologize," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For everything. For not being honest about my condition, for putting you in this impossible situation. I never meant to hurt you." Madison looked up at him, seeing the confusion and pain in his expression. This was the man she'd fallen in love with. Kind, genuine, but now so clearly lost in his own emotional maze. "I know you didn't," she said gently. "But Matthew, you need to be honest now, not just with me, but with yourself." He reached for her hand, then hesitated, letting his arm fall back to his side. "I don't know what I feel anymore," he admitted. "When I'm with you during the day, everything feels right. You bring such light and warmth to my life. But then the episodes come, and I'm lost again. And now with Alina—" He shook his head, struggling to find words. Madison took a deep breath, drawing on the strength she'd gathered from her morning with her clients. "That's why you need this meeting," she said. "You need clarity, Matthew. You need to face your past so you can truly decide your future." "What if I make the wrong choice?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "The only wrong choice would be lying to yourself or to either of us." Madison stepped back slightly, creating physical space to match the emotional distance they both needed. "Go to your meeting. Talk to Alina. Be honest about everything you're feeling." Matthew checked his watch, his movements tense. "I should go. The car is waiting." He paused at the study door, looking back at Madison with an expression that broke her heart. Lost, apologetic, and somehow both present and absent at once. Madison followed him to the front hall, watching as he put on his coat. Through the grand windows, she could see the sleek, black car waiting in the circular drive. Matthew turned to her one last time, opened his mouth as if to speak, then simply nodded and walked out. She stood at the window, watching as he climbed into the car. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, carrying him toward a meeting that could change everything. Madison remained there until the car disappeared from view, then slowly made her way to the dining room. The staff had set out afternoon tea, the delicate china teapot steaming gently beside a cup and saucer. Madison sat in her usual chair, staring at the untouched tea as it grew cold. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. Clasping her hands in her lap, Madison bowed her head. "Lord," she whispered, "give him clarity to see the truth. Give him courage to face it, and give me strength to accept whatever that truth might be." Her voice caught on the last words, but she remained seated, still and composed, as the shadows lengthened and the tea grew cold before her. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 5 o'clock, its chimes echoing through the quiet house. Madison remained at the table, her tea untouched, her prayer unending, waiting for whatever the evening would bring. The recovery community sat nestled among towering pine trees, its modern buildings designed to blend with the peaceful natural surroundings. Matthew parked his car in the visitor lot, his hands trembling slightly as he turned off the engine. Through the windshield, he could see the community's main building, its large windows reflecting the late afternoon sunlight. He checked his watch. 4:35 in the afternoon. Alina would be waiting in the garden area, according to the staff member who had arranged their meeting. Taking several deep breaths, Matthew stepped out of his car, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs. The garden path wound through carefully tended flower beds, leading to a quiet seating area partially sheltered by mature aspen trees. As he rounded the corner, he saw her. Alina Cross sat on a wooden bench, her hands folded in her lap. She looked different from the portraits in his locked room, thinner with faint lines around her eyes that spoke of hardship. But her elegant posture remained unchanged, as did the gentle way she tilted her head when she heard his approach. "Matthew," she said softly, standing to face him. He stopped a few feet away, his heart pounding. This woman had been his first love, his wife, the ghost that haunted his nights. Now she stood before him, real and alive, yet somehow more distant than the memories that had tormented him for years. "Alina," he managed to say, I don't know where to begin." She gestured to the bench. "Perhaps we could sit. The doctors say I should still rest frequently." They sat with careful space between them, the afternoon sun filtering through the aspen leaves above. For several moments neither spoke, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves in the mountain breeze. "I remember everything now," Alina said finally, her voice steady but gentle. "The memories started returning about 6 months ago. The accident, the storm, being rescued by that fishing boat. I had severe head trauma. It took years of healing before my mind began to piece things together." Matthew gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles white. 6 months? You've known for 6 months? She turned to face him, her expression filled with compassion. "I needed time, Matthew. Time to understand who I am now, to reconcile my past with my present. The doctors helped me understand that rushing back into my old life might do more harm than good, for everyone involved." "For 5 years," Matthew said, his voice rough with emotion. "I watched you die in my dreams every night. I lost myself, Alina. I couldn't recognize faces anymore. He stopped, overwhelmed by the flood of memories. "I know about your condition," she said softly. "Dr. Celine has kept in touch with my medical team. That's part of why I waited. I needed to be sure I was strong enough to help, not hurt, when I came back." Matthew felt the familiar disorientation beginning to creep in at the edges of his vision, the start of an episode. He tried to focus on Alina's face, to anchor himself in the present moment, but her features began to blur and shift. "Matthew." Her voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you having an episode?" He nodded, panic rising in his chest as the world around him became a confusing maze of unfamiliar shapes and faces. But something was different this time, terrifyingly different. Where before he had always been able to recognize Alina's face during his episodes, now he couldn't see her at all. The woman beside him was a stranger, her features impossible to grasp. "Madison?" he called out instinctively, his voice tight with fear. "Madison, where are you?" He felt Alina's hand touch his arm gently, then withdraw. "It's all right, Matthew. Just breathe. This will pass." For several long minutes, they sat in silence as Matthew fought through the episode. Gradually, his vision cleared, the world slowly coming back into focus. When he could finally see properly again, he turned to Alina with tears in his eyes. "I couldn't see you," he whispered. "All these years, yours was the only face I could recognize during episodes. But just now, I couldn't see you at all. Instead, I called for Madison." Alina finished quietly. "Your wife?" Matthew buried his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Alina. I never expected to find love again. When I met Madison, I thought God was testing me, or tormenting me, sending someone who looked so much like you. But she—" He lifted his head, looking out at the peaceful garden. "She brought light back into my world. She sees me, all of me, even the broken parts, and loves me anyway." Alina's smile was gentle, touched with both sadness and genuine warmth. "The heart knows what it needs to heal, Matthew. I'm not here to reclaim the past. I've found my own peace, my own path forward. I just needed you to know that I'm alive, that I'm well, and that you don't need to carry the weight of my ghost anymore." "You're sure?" he asked, searching her face. "You've built a new life?" She nodded. "I have. It's different from what I had before, but it's mine. I work with other trauma survivors now, helping them find their way back to themselves. I've found purpose in that." Matthew felt something shift inside him. A letting go, a weight lifting. The woman beside him was real, alive, and whole. But she wasn't his anymore, just as he was no longer hers. The past they shared would always be part of their stories, but it no longer had the power to control their futures. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving me the truth, for giving me permission to move forward." Alina stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced grace. "Be happy, Matthew. Love fully, and please tell Madison." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tell her that she doesn't need to fear my ghost anymore. The man she loves belongs wholly to her now." Matthew rose as well, feeling both heartbreak and clarity coursing through him. They shared one final look, acknowledgement of all they had been to each other, and acceptance of all they now were not. Without another word, he turned and walked back along the garden path. Each step felt both heavy with the weight of ending and lighter with the promise of beginning anew. As he reached his car, the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, a reminder that even the longest days must end, making way for new dawns to come. Matthew's drive home felt both eternal and impossibly brief. The Denver skyline glowed amber against the darkening sky as he pulled into the mansion's circular driveway, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The house lights were on, casting warm rectangles onto the manicured lawn, and through the kitchen window he could see Madison moving about, the sight of her making his heart constrict. He sat in the car for several long moments, gathering his courage. The scent of something cooking, perhaps pasta, drifted through the air when he finally opened the front door. The familiar aroma of garlic and herbs led him to the kitchen, where Madison stood at the stove, stirring a pot of what looked like simple spaghetti marinara. She glanced up at his entrance, her expression carefully neutral. "Hi," she said softly, turning back to the stove. "I was just making something quick for myself. I wasn't sure when you'd be back." "It smells wonderful," Matthew said, his voice rough with emotion. He cleared his throat. "Madison, could we talk?" She nodded, reducing the heat under the pot to a simmer. "Let me just—" She gestured to the stove. "Of course. Would you like to sit in the breakfast nook? It's more comfortable than the formal dining room." Madison followed him to the cozy alcove with its cushioned window seat and small round table. The setting sun painted everything in shades of deep gold and purple, casting long shadows across the polished wood floor. They sat across from each other, neither speaking at first, the only sound the quiet bubbling of the pasta sauce in the kitchen. Matthew studied his hands where they rested on the table, gathering his thoughts. When he finally looked up, the love and worry in Madison's eyes nearly undid him. "I met with Alina today," he began quietly. She's well. She's been working with trauma survivors, helping them rebuild their lives. She said she waited to contact me until she was strong enough to handle it properly." Madison listened intently, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't interrupt, giving him space to find his words. "We talked about the accident, about her recovery. She remembered everything months ago but needed time to process before reaching out." He swallowed hard. "And then something happened that I never expected. I had an episode while we were talking." Madison's breath caught slightly, but she remained silent, her dark eyes fixed on his face. In all these years, through every episode, Alina's face was the only one I could recognize. It became a torture and a comfort, seeing her everywhere, in everyone. But today, he shook his head in wonder. Today, when the episode hit, I couldn't see her at all. Her face was as unfamiliar to me as any stranger's. The kitchen timer chimed distantly, but neither of them moved. Madison's fingers twisted together in her lap as Matthew continued. "I panicked at first, feeling more lost than ever. And then—" He met Madison's gaze directly. "I called out for you, in the middle of my episode, sitting next to Alina, the only person I wanted, The only face I needed to see was yours." Madison's eyes widened slightly, but she remained still, waiting. It made me realize something I should have understood weeks ago. The reason I can always recognize you isn't because you look like Alina. It's because you're you, Madison. You're the one who brings me back to myself, who makes me feel whole even when my mind betrays me. His voice grew hoarse with emotion. "You're the one I see because you're the one I love, truly love, not as a replacement or a ghost, but as yourself." A single tear slipped down Madison's cheek, but she quickly brushed it away. "Matthew," she whispered. "I know I've hurt you," he continued. "I know I should have been honest from the start about my condition, about Alina, about everything. I was so afraid of losing you that I risked losing you anyway through my silence." He reached across the table, palm up in supplication. "Madison, can we start again?" Madison stared at his outstretched hand, her fork forgotten beside her empty plate, stunned by the depth of emotion in his voice and the earnestness of his request. Dawn painted the Denver sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Madison stepped out of the penthouse building. The early morning air held a crisp freshness that matched her need for clarity. She pulled her light sweater closer, grateful for the quiet streets and the promise of solitude in Washington Park, just a few blocks away. Her comfortable walking shoes carried her along the familiar path, past brownstones and coffee shops just beginning to wake. The rhythm of her steps provided a steady backdrop for her swirling thoughts. Matthew's words from the previous evening echoed in her mind. "You're the one I see because you're the one I love." The park welcomed her, with dew-kissed grass and the soft chirping of early birds. Madison found herself drawn to the rose garden, where late summer blooms still offered splashes of color against the green backdrop. She settled onto a wooden bench, watching the sunrise paint everything in soft light. "The first time he brought me here," she whispered to herself, "he knew every single rose variety by name." The memory surfaced clearly. Matthew gently cupping a pale pink bloom, explaining how his grandmother had taught him about flowers. His eyes had sparkled with genuine joy as he shared that piece of himself with her. Another memory rose unbidden. Their third date, when he'd noticed her shivering at an outdoor concert and immediately wrapped his suit jacket around her shoulders. He'd been so attentive, so present in that moment, asking if she was warm enough, if she needed anything else. Madison stood, continuing her walk along the lake's edge. The water reflected the morning light like scattered diamonds, reminding her of their wedding day. Matthew had tears in his eyes as he'd recited his vows, his voice trembling with emotion. She'd attributed his intensity to normal wedding day feelings. But now she understood the deeper courage it had taken for him to open his heart again. 2 joggers passed her, offering friendly waves that she returned automatically. Her mind was still processing the previous evening, the raw honesty in Matthew's voice when he'd explained about his episode with Alina. He hadn't tried to hide his confusion or vulnerability. Instead, he'd shared everything, finally letting her see all of him, broken pieces and all. "He's always shown me who he is," Madison realized, speaking softly to the morning air. "Even when he couldn't explain everything, he showed me through his actions." She remembered countless small moments, the way he'd light up when she entered a room, how he'd seek her hand during charity events, his genuine interest in her work with senior citizens. Even during his episodes when facial recognition failed him, he'd reached for her, trusted her, called out for her. The morning grew warmer as Madison completed her circuit of the park. Her steps turned homeward, her heart feeling lighter with each block. As she approached the penthouse building, the doorman greeted her with a warm smile and handed her an envelope. "This was delivered for you this morning, Mrs. Cross," he said kindly. Madison thanked him, recognizing the elegant handwriting that spelled out her name. Finding a quiet corner in the lobby, she opened the letter with careful fingers. "Dear Madison," it began in flowing script. "I hope you'll forgive this unexpected letter, but after meeting with Matthew yesterday, I felt compelled to write to you. There are things you deserve to hear, and I believe I may be the only one who can truly say them. First, thank you. Thank you for being there for Matthew when I couldn't be, for helping him find his way back to himself. The man I saw yesterday is so different from the broken soul I remember, and that transformation is because of you. I know my reappearance has complicated your lives, and for that I am truly sorry. But please understand something vital. Love after loss is not betrayal, it's healing. I've learned this in my own journey of recovery. The heart doesn't replace love. It expands to embrace new love while honoring what came before. Matthew's face when he spoke of you told me everything I needed to know. The way his eyes lit up, how his whole demeanor changed. That's not guilt or obligation. That's pure love, Madison. The kind that comes once in a lifetime, or perhaps twice, if we're very blessed. I want you to know that you have my blessing, though you never needed it. Your love for Matthew is your own beautiful story, separate from our past. Don't let my ghost haunt your future. Take care of him, Madison. And more importantly, let him take care of you. With sincere warmth, Alina. Madison pressed the letter to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. The words had struck deep, answering questions she hadn't even known how to ask. The generosity of spirit in Alina's letter moved her profoundly. Taking a deep breath, Madison rode the elevator to the penthouse floor. She knew Matthew would be in the library. It was his favorite morning spot, where sunlight streamed through tall windows and warmed the leather-bound books he treasured. Sure enough, she found him there, sitting in his favorite armchair, a book open but unread in his lap. He looked up as she entered, hope and uncertainty mingling in his expression. Madison crossed the room with quiet steps, settling into the chair beside him. Her heart felt full as she took in his familiar features, seeing now the deep love that had always been there, waiting for her to truly understand it. She placed Alina's letter on the small table between them, ready to hear everything he needed to say, ready to begin again with complete honesty between them. The morning sun cast warm patches of light across the floor, and Madison felt, for the first time in weeks, truly at peace with where she was and who she was meant to be. The library's warm glow softened as afternoon faded into evening. Madison and Matthew sat facing each other, the letter from Alina resting between them like a bridge connecting their separate shores of understanding. Outside, Denver's lights began twinkling on, one by one, as if the city itself was preparing for their long-awaited conversation. "I don't know where to start," Matthew admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands twisted together in his lap, a gesture Madison had come to recognize as his struggle for control. "There's so much I should have told you." Madison leaned forward slightly, her heart aching at his visible distress. "Start anywhere," she encouraged softly. "We have all night." Matthew took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling with the effort. "The first time I saw you," he began, "at that charity gala for the children's hospital, I nearly walked out of the room, not because you looked like Alina, but because you made me feel something I thought had died years ago, hope." His words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Madison remained silent, giving him space to continue. "You were helping an elderly donor who had dropped her purse," he went on, a small smile touching his lips at the memory. "Everyone else just walked past, but you stopped. You didn't just pick up her things. You sat with her, made her laugh, treated her like she mattered. That's when I knew I had to meet you." Tears pricked at Madison's eyes as she remembered that evening. How nervous she'd been at such a fancy event. How focusing on helping others had grounded her. "Your kindness," Matthew continued, his voice growing stronger. "It wasn't just something you did. It was who you were. Every time I saw you after that, you were bringing life back into spaces that had grown cold, including me." He stood suddenly, pacing to the window. The city lights reflected in his eyes as he gazed out. "I should have told you about my condition before we married, about Alina, about everything. I was so afraid." "Of what?" Madison prompted gently when he trailed off. Matthew turned back to face her, vulnerability etched across his features. "That you'd see me as broken. That you'd realize I couldn't guarantee I'd always recognize your face. That you'd understand I wake up some mornings not knowing my own reflection in the mirror." Madison's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. She rose and crossed to him, stopping just short of touching him. "Matthew, those things don't make you broken. They make you human." He drew in a shaky breath. "The nights I watched you sleep. It wasn't because I was seeing Alina's ghost. It was because seeing you, being able to recognize you even during my episodes, it anchored me. You became my touchstone, Madison. My proof that I wasn't completely losing my mind." Tears spilled down Madison's cheeks as understanding dawned. All those nights she'd felt watched, worried, afraid. He'd been holding on to her presence like a lifeline. "Why didn't you just tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Because I was ashamed," he admitted. "And because I fell in love with you so completely, so unexpectedly, that it terrified me. Here I was, still carrying all this trauma, all this uncertainty, and you deserved someone whole." Madison reached out then, taking his hand in hers. "Nobody's whole, Matthew. We're all just pieces trying to fit together." He squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her touch. "When I couldn't recognize Alina today, it shocked me. But what shocked me more was that in that moment of panic, it was your face I searched for. Your name I called." Madison's tears fell faster now, years of built-up hurt and fear releasing with each drop. Matthew pulled her gently into his arms, his own tears falling into her hair. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "So sorry for every moment I made you doubt your place in my heart. You're not a replacement, Madison. You're not a second chance or a test from God. You're the woman who taught me how to live again." They held each other as the room grew darker, the city lights casting long shadows across the floor. When they finally pulled apart, Madison wiped her eyes and looked up at him with determination. "We need help," she said firmly. "Professional help. Both of us, together and separately." Matthew nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I've already reached out to Dr. Warner. She specializes in couples counseling and has experience with trauma-related conditions." "And no more secrets," Madison added. "Even the scary ones, especially the scary ones." "No more secrets," he agreed solemnly. "I want to rebuild this right, Madison, slowly, honestly, completely." She nodded, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Then we'll rebuild together, one day at a time." Matthew touched her cheek gently, his eyes full of love and gratitude. "Will you come back to our room?" he asked, softly. "I haven't slept properly since you moved to the guest room." Madison leaned into his touch, feeling the rightness of his hand against her skin. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's go home." Hand in hand, they walked through the quiet penthouse toward their bedroom. The halls no longer felt haunted by unspoken truths or hidden pain. Instead, each step felt like moving forward, together, into a future they would build with open hearts and honest words. As Matthew opened their bedroom door, Madison felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. They had a long way to go, but tonight they had found their way back to each other, not as ghosts or replacements or second chances, but as two people choosing to love each other through all their beautiful broken pieces. Golden sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting warm stripes across the master bedroom's cream-colored walls. Matthew stirred first, his consciousness gradually rising to meet the peaceful morning. For the first time in years, he felt truly rested, truly present. Madison lay sleeping beside him, her face serene in the early morning light. Instead of sitting apart in the chair as he had so many nights before, Matthew stayed close, gently holding her hand. He traced small circles on her palm with his thumb, watching her features not with desperate searching or haunted memory, but with pure gratitude. Her eyelashes fluttered, and slowly she opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. For a moment they simply looked at each other, sharing soft smiles that held no shadow of the past. "Good morning," Matthew whispered, squeezing her hand. Madison's smile widened. "Good morning." She stretched contentedly. "No chair today?" He shook his head, pulling her closer. No more chairs, no more distance. They lay there for a while, listening to the city wake up beyond their windows, until Madison's stomach growled audibly. They both burst into laughter, the sound bright and healing in the morning air. "Breakfast," Matthew suggested, already sitting up. "Together," Madison agreed, taking his offered hand as she rose. They made their way to the kitchen, still in their pajamas, moving around each other with newfound ease. Matthew started the coffee while Madison gathered ingredients for French toast, her specialty. The simple domesticity of it felt sacred somehow, like a ritual marking their fresh start. "You're getting egg everywhere," Matthew teased as Madison dipped the bread. She flicked a tiny bit of batter at him playfully. "That's because someone keeps distracting me." He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her flour-dusted knuckles. Guilty as charged. They had just finished eating when Celine arrived, looking more relaxed than Madison had ever seen her. The three of them settled in the living room, sunlight warming the space as they discussed plans for the future. "I've been thinking," Matthew began, reaching for Madison's hand. "We should expand the Cross Foundations. Focus." Madison tilted her head curiously. "What did you have in mind?" "A new initiative," he explained, "combining trauma recovery support with senior care services. Your work with the elderly has shown me how much need there is, and after everything we've been through—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Well, I think we're uniquely positioned to understand both worlds." Celine leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "The medical community has been pushing for more integrated care approaches. This could make a real difference. We could start with pilot programs in Denver," Madison suggested, her professional experience emerging. "Partner with existing senior centers, maybe add counseling services and support groups." They spent hours discussing possibilities, mapping out ideas on Matthew's tablet. Madison's practical knowledge of community health needs perfectly complemented Matthew's philanthropic experience, while Celine offered valuable medical insights. As the day wound down, Celine hugged them both before leaving. "You know," she said at the door, "I haven't seen either of you look this happy in a long time." After she left, Matthew and Madison ordered takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant, eating on the balcony as they watched the sunset paint the Denver skyline in shades of pink and gold. The evening air was cool but not cold, carrying the promise of spring. When night fell, they prepared for bed with peaceful hearts. Madison curled up under the covers, feeling Matthew settle in beside her. As sleep began to pull at her consciousness, she felt him watching her, not with the desperate intensity of before, but with gentle wonder. "Thank God for you," he whispered softly, the words floating in the darkness like a prayer. Madison drifted off with a smile, knowing that what had once been haunted love had finally transformed into something healed and whole. The ghosts of the past had not been banished exactly, but had been honored and released, making room for new love to grow in their place. Matthew's grateful whisper hung in the air like a blessing, marking the end of their journey from fear to faith and the beginning of all that lay ahead. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.